I am going to punch somebody in the face for that. Possibly next week. Or during a call with my internet provider. But that remains to be seen. Anyway, let me know if you can hear me. Otherwise, I'm going to be very disappointed in myself. I hope I'm still live. Am I still live? Just like in that... well, the classic joke. Is this thing still on? Okay, then. Let's see here. Let's try to relaunch it. Okay. Signal me in the chat if you can still see me. And if you do not, well, I'll relaunch the stream. Would affect the YouTube upload? I do not know. If it will get broken up into multiple parts like the show gutter stream, then yes, there is a possibility for that. Hopefully not, because the counter still shows that I have been consistently live. We'll see about that. Now then, let's continue where we left off then, shall we? Kotick promised that Blizzard would retain its autonomy. In 2008, as the merger closed and he took his seat as CEO of Activision Blizzard, he said he believed his job was to give each of their subsidiaries the freedom to be creative. If you took any of the studios we have anywhere in the world, they all retain their own culture and identity, he told the reporter. At the same time, observers couldn't help but notice that Kotick's business philosophy seemed to be diametrically opposed to the values that Blizzard had been preaching since the Silicon and Synapse days. Paul Reich, founder of the game studio Toys for Bob, which Activision acquired in 2005, described it as an explicit divide. That was really a fundamental understood concept at Activision, Reich said. We weren't doing this for art, for the player first. We were creating a product to make money. Chapter 13: Growing Pains. In March 2008, just a few months after the merger was announced, Blizzard Entertainment packed up and left behind its UC Irvine offices for a new campus on Alton Parkway. Whereas Blizzard's previous offices had been muted and unadorned, this campus had a guarded entrance topped with a large iron gate featuring the company's name. Later, the mayor of Irvine would grant it a fitting new address: 1 Blizzard Way. The move had been in the works for several years. After the release of World of Warcraft, Blizzard began running employee surveys and saw a consistent theme. Their games were so successful, so why was their office so bleak? In the past, Morhaime and his leadership team had been frugal when it came to their workplace, but now it was clear that they needed an upgrade to retain talent. The new campus was 240,000 square feet, with lined with trees and gray... God fucking damn it. I am going to punch somebody in the face over this. Indignity. Oh, fucking... Anyway. The new campus was 240,000 square feet, lined with trees and grey office buildings, flanking a gym, a volleyball court, and 2 basketball courts. Blizzard's executives set up a library and even a private museum that included the company's huge selection of awards, script pages from the World of Warcraft episode of South Park, and a letter from a soldier who had played the game while serving in Iraq. Later, Morhaime framed the 1991 loan agreement that he had struck with his grandmother, $15,000, interest-free, to help him and Adam start Silicon and Synapse. In the 17 years since then, Blizzard had become the sprawling empire that the two of them once dreamed about. Since the release of World of Warcraft, the company had expanded into the thousands, not just in game development, but in sales, marketing, finance, cinematics, and the countless customer service operatives who worked non-stop shifts to address players' problems. That would require another consistent theme. So let's see here. I think we can go back to Diablo soundtrack with this one. Diablo 1 specifically. Like that. Less than a year after the move, executives were even dreaming up plans to design yet another, more sprawling campus. "We were supposed to be in those 3 buildings for 5 to 10 years, said one person who worked there. "We outgrew them in 3 months. As the company reckoned with its bulging headcount, a group of Blizzard's top executives and managers gathered for an off-site meeting with a lofty goal: figure out what Blizzard stood for. Under the guidance of an outside management guru, Morhaime and his team whittled down the company's philosophy to 8 core values, each represented with a short and catchy phrase, which I'm going to post in a second. I know this all sounds very tedious with all those cuts, let's call them that. But hey, I'm doing my best here. And here are those values. Gameplay first, commit to quality, play nice, play fair, embrace your inner geek, learn and grow, think globally, or rather, learn and grow, every voice matters, think globally, lead responsibly. The values began to drive conversations throughout the company, leading developers to stamp "play nice, play fair" on top of a presentation or argue that they were correct about a design decision because they were committing to quality. That summer, Blizzard installed what would be the centerpiece of the campus for years to come. A 12-foot, 2-ton bronze statue of a snarling Warcraft orc riding a wolf, his axe held high. Circling the statue were 8 plaques, each stamped with one of the values. Gameplay first, commit to quality, every voice matters. Even the most cynical Blizzard employee could get nerd chills when they saw it. Since reluctantly taking over as president of Blizzard 10 years earlier, Morhaime had grown to embrace the role. He joined a CEO support group, meeting with cadres of chief executives from other industries to talk about strategic and personnel challenges. He pushed staff to embrace a single guiding mantra: if you serve players first, the profits will follow, and set up an email mic program for employees to reach out with questions. Mike Morhaime is as awesome as everyone says he is, said Jeremy Masker. It didn't matter if you were associate QA or an executive producer. He treated everyone well. Even as his role expanded, Morhaime continued to lead on Paul Sams to run the non-development parts of the company. During the merger process, the pair negotiated clauses in their contracts that would prevent them from being fired except under egregious circumstances, such as criminal activity, which they figured would help them protect Blizzard from corporate pressure when they were inevitably late on a game. On July 20, 2008, the merger was finalized and Blizzard Entertainment became a subsidiary of Activision Blizzard. Veteran staff who were lucky enough to have equity received significant paydays, and everyone began eyeing Bobby Kotick, now their corporate boss, wondering what he had planned. Blizzard's employees weren't sure what to make of this shrewd businessman, but they did know that they could rely on Morhaime and Sams to maintain the company's values. It seemed like upper management at Blizzard was able to stave off any control or chances that happened when we got bought out before, said Jay Hathaway, an animator. Besides, they're buying us because we're good. Why would they want to change anything? The answer was, they didn't. As Blizzard employees grew into their new digs, few even noticed that they had changed corporate parents. "It was very hands-off for a while," said Alex Brazy, a designer on World of Warcraft. "Even if Activision's executives had wanted to come up and tear up the carpets, they were busy. The company's latest big game, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, had been a monumental success, selling more than 10 million copies and turning into the best-selling game of 2007. And I'm going to shill yet another creator here. This time, I recommend watching Ahoy's video on the development and lead-up of Call of Duty 4, and really how monumental it was. Soon, Kotick would be involved in a nasty legal dispute with Call of Duty's creators, whom he fired after accusing them of breaching their contracts, which occupied much of his attention. You've probably heard about them, Vince and Zampella. There was no need to get involved with Blizzard because World of Warcraft remained, by some estimates, the most lucrative video game ever made. By the end of 2008, 11.5 million people were paying monthly to play World of Warcraft. In other words, the land of Azeroth had a larger population than countries like New Zealand, Norway, and Greece. Every time the game surpassed the population of a new country, World of Warcraft designer John Stotts would send out a taunting email. "In your face, Estonia," he recalled writing. "Suck it, Switzerland!" During the 4 years that World of Warcraft had been in operation, the game had become a second home to a lot of its players, who met friends and future spouses, raced to complete new raids, and organized in-game protests when they weren't happy with Blizzard's decisions. Despite taking place in a realm full of orcs and sorcerers, World of Warcraft became a hotbed of real-life sociological and economic questions. The in-game currency, gold, became so valuable that outside websites popped up to facilitate buying and selling it for real cash, a violation of the game's terms of service, but there were too many offenders for Blizzard to possibly quash them all. A string of companies, mainly in China, hired workers to spend all day battling monsters for gold that they would then sell to other players, mainly in the United States. These so-called gold farmers became a perpetual presence in World of Warcraft for many years, despite Blizzard's attempts to whack-a-mole them. Another side note, one gold farming company, IGE, was briefly helmed by the right-wing firebrand Steve Bannon, who would later play an outside role in US politics as a strategist to Donald Trump. One IGE operator profiled in Wired magazine was said to force its employees to work 84 hours a week for about $4 per day. Epidemiologists also had a field day with World of Warcraft thanks to a raid boss that could infect players with a contagious, debilitating virus. The effect was meant to be contained within the raid, but a programming oversight led to the disease escaping, leaving corpses strewn across Azeroth. "People were scrambling to deal with it," said programmer David Ray. Much later, the United States Centers for Disease and Control and Prevention would contact Blizzard for their data on how people behaved during this in-game pandemic. After all, World of Warcraft was a more useful case study than any mathematical model. In the past, Blizzard had developed games the traditional way: finish a product, then move to the next one. But because players were now paying a monthly fee, they expected World of Warcraft to receive a never-ending stream of content: new dungeons, monsters, areas, and stories. The first expansion, The Burning Crusade, came out in January 2007 to a critical acclaim. By the time they had moved to the new campus, Team 2 was in the thick of development on Wrath of the Lich King, an expansion that would continue the story of Arthas, the fallen hero of Warcraft 3. For many of Blizzard's developers, Wrath of the Lich King represented the company at the peak of its powers. But Biden works for China. I can't say I know too much about Bannon, so I cannot comment on that one. "At that point, we had everything figured out," said Chris DeMeza, a designer on the game. "We were more confident in making expansions and knowing what they could be." Each new update brought in more subscriptions, and Team 2 turned into an ivory tower on Blizzard's campus. As the money rolled in and the numbers went up, World of Warcraft's top designers and producers became geek celebrities. Every fall at BlizzCon, which was growing larger every year, fans would come up to World of Warcraft developers to ask for autographs and share stories. When people come up to you and tell you how the game has changed their life or saved their life, you really feel a missionary kind of experience, said Chris Kaleki, a designer. Gigantic piece of garbage, talking Manafort levels. I'll believe you on that one. But this newfound fame and fortune also impacted some of Blizzard's staff in less virtuous ways. "Success like that has the power to change people," said Sean Carnes, a designer. "When millions turn into billions, everything changes." Blizzard in the 1990s had felt like a frat house, almost entirely men working together during the day and playing games or partying at night, occasionally getting into drunken antics or fistfights. But by the mid-2000s, Blizzard had evolved. Now it was more like a whole college campus. The renowned video game company entered a tween-like state of maturation as it aimed to become a proper company, with codified HR policies and more women joining every day. Within the next few years, women would make up about 20% of Blizzard's staff, which was also the industry average. "It is the sad reality of this industry," said Demeza, one of the few women on the World of Warcraft team. "It is no secret, and everybody will tell you, that Blizzard was a boys' club all the time." Still, both men and women felt like there was nowhere else like Blizzard, and many of them were thrilled to come to work every day. New employees would walk onto the campus and declare that they would spend the rest of their lives there. If you were a geek who had grown up in the 20th century, when comic books and video games were associated with misfits and social outcasts, working at Blizzard was like finding your tribe. A place where you didn't have to hide your nerdy pastimes to maintain your place in the social hierarchy. If anything, the opposite was true. Having an encyclopedic knowledge of Final Fantasy lore or a massive collection of Batman comics was a sign you were one of them. "There used to be a saying," said one customer service representative, "a bad day at Blizzard is better than a good day everywhere else." Employees frequently wore t-shirts and hoodies emblazoned with the blue Blizzard logo. At the office, they gathered for D&D nights, workout sessions, and art groups, and then on weekends they met up for barbecues and surf clubs. They were granted custom trophies based on their tenure at the company. At 5 years, they'd get a sword in an elaborate ceremony that felt almost like an initiation. 10 years was a shield. 15 years was a ring. And later, when the company turned 20, employees who had spent 2 decades of their lives at Blizzard would score an ornate crown modeled after Lich King's helmet. Loyal employees had an expression, "Bleed Blizzard Blue," that was easy to imagine being chanted at a college football stadium. Some staff would even rent out apartments within walking distance of the office that they called the Blizzard dorms. But this dedication to the brand would also be weaponized, and new employees were expected to put up with practices that they might not have accepted at others' shops. Blizzard often hired people on one rung on the corporate ladder below where they might land elsewhere in the industry, telling them that a senior developer at, say, Ubisoft was the equivalent of a mid-level developer at Blizzard. Salaries were still lower than those at competing companies, with a promise that profit-sharing checks would help close the gap, but the bonus system was opaque and Byzantine. "To this day, I couldn't tell you the process," said Sean Carnes, "and I was a fucking manager." Later, in a push for more transparency, the company began telling employees their largest target bonus numbers ahead of each year, and many who received 5- or 6-figure checks found themselves even more loyal to Blizzard. But they also found a culture that stratified into 2 tiers, game developers and non-game developers. Those who worked in Warcraft and Starcraft received better perks and swag than their colleagues on support teams, while people in divisions such as Battle.net or marketing found that their priorities were secondary. You know what this calls for? I think you know what this calls for.
Developers. Yes!
This classification was by design. Paul Sams liked to say that nobody under him would even have jobs without the developers. But it also led to bitter feelings. An effective caste system emerged, said business manager Vlad Koho. It was a real division between developers and everyone else. Yes, not the song, because honestly, the live performance is also pretty nice. And as on a college campus, hormones raged across Blizzard, where it seemed like the entire company was part of one big incestuous relationship. A practice discouraged by other corporate atmospheres seemed to be rampant in Irvine. Everyone was either married or dating someone else at Blizzard, said one woman who joined the company around this time. Why would you mix the two? Side note. So many Blizzard employees dated and married one another that while reporting for this book, I would interview someone who worked there only to then learn that I had already talked to their spouse who also worked there. This happened on three different occasions. Nearly every top executive at Blizzard was involved with someone lower than them at the company, including Morhaime, Sams, and Metzen. The executives and their partners signed paperwork called love contracts, declaring that the relationships were consensual and that they would avoid conflicts of interest. But in some cases, these relationships still became messy for everyone involved. Frank Pierce, Blizzard's first employee and now one of the company's senior executives, split with his wife, who also worked at Blizzard, and dated a woman in customer service, many rungs below him. He and Lisa Pierce, a manager in the business department, divorced in 2007. She would wind up staying at the company for another 4 years, maintaining what she called a good working relationship with her ex-husband once they'd finalized their divorce. But, she said, it was awkward for a lot of different reasons. Years later, Frank Pierce would wind up partnering with a third woman at Blizzard. Women at Blizzard sometimes found themselves fending off unwanted advances when they were trying to do their jobs. Conventionally attractive women would be greeted by lines of men waiting to introduce themselves, while managers, especially in lower-level departments like QA and customer service, felt comfortable hitting on employees who directly reported to them. After all, they argued, the bosses had done it. The company was hiring more women but seemed to have trouble treating those women equitably. It would be years before the company implemented some standard policies like parental leave and lactation rooms. And sometimes, as one couple learned, the blurring of professional and personal life at Blizzard could have severe repercussions. Anissa Housley and Jeremy Wood first met in a World of Warcraft guild for Blizzard employees. Wood, the guild leader, was a programmer who had worked on the game during the early days, while Housley didn't work at Blizzard but was married to J. Allen Brack, World of Warcraft's top producer. Housley and Wood found that they had a lot in common. They both liked rock climbing, they were both introverted. During parties at Brack's and Housley's house, they would go off and play Guitar Hero while everybody else was drinking. And they were both unhappy in their marriages. After realizing that they had feelings for each other, Housley and Wood made plans to leave their spouses. An ugly situation rendered even uglier because Wood's wife was pregnant. It was a messy personal knot that might have been left to divorce proceedings and friend circle gossip, if not for the fact that Brack was one of Blizzard's most powerful developers. Wood said he suddenly found himself iced out at work and that he was placed on a performance improvement plan for failing to produce results, which was completely drummed up, he said. Colleagues who had worked with him for years would avoid making eye contact when he passed them on campus, he said. He was advised by a family lawyer not to leave the company for financial reasons, so he stuck around trying to not contact Brack. While I think what he did was reprehensible, his anger and resentment were understandable, Wood said. After floundering for 2 more years, Wood was fired. The event was indicative of the uglier side of Blizzard's culture, where wronging a powerful person outside of the office could make it more difficult to sustain a career. There were other complicating factors. Wood had a reputation for being abrasive and a history of being rude to colleagues, and some friends undoubtedly cut ties with him because he left his wife while she was pregnant. But the couple also believed that Wood's career at Blizzard was derailed because of their relationship choices. It's the fact that our normal human issues became a Blizzard professional issue that made it weird and damaging, said Housley. On November 13th, 2008, Blizzard released World of Warcraft. Yeah, things are starting to get even worse than Chapter 1. Well, because that's Part 2. If you recall, it's called Fall. And it's only gonna get worse from now on, believe me. On November 13th, 2008, Blizzard released World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King. It was critically acclaimed and became the fastest-selling computer game of all time, moving 2.8 million copies in just 24 hours. The previous record, 2.4 million copies, was set by The Burning Crusade. On an earnings call a few months later, Bobby Kotick bragged about the company's ability to weather the ongoing global economic recession with predictable and stable franchises that have served us well over long periods of time. For Blizzard, that would mean a brand new release just about every year, mostly involving the company's tentpole franchises: Warcraft, Starcraft, and Diablo. The video game industry was growing exponentially. Back in 1997, games generated about $5 billion in revenue. By the end of 2008, they had leaped to $21 billion, according to data from analysts at the NPD Group. For a thriving Blizzard, it made sense to work on as many projects as possible. Team 1 was developing a sequel to StarCraft. Team 2 moved right from Wrath of the Lich King to the next World of Warcraft expansion, which would be called Cataclysm. Blizzard formed Team 3 to work on Diablo 3 after Blizzard North shuttered and the project moved down to Irvine, and the new unit, the mysterious Team 4, was quietly incubating a secret game called Titan. But Blizzard's when it's ready philosophy seemed to be holding up games for longer than ever before, in large part because of World of Warcraft was sucking up so many of the company's resources. Back in the 1990s, Blizzard had developed a reputation for taking as long as necessary to make video games, but that meant missing Christmas by a week or shipping in March instead of December. Now, it could mean slipping for years. Whew. Now, I am tempted to continue for at least one more chapter, but I gotta ask. Would you stay awake for that long? Because we are hitting something very, very juicy. Something as delicious as a kimchi, if you catch my meaning. Let's continue then. So, Chapter 14, Baseball 2.0. In South Korea, StarCraft wasn't just a video game. It was a national sport. Koreans frequently gathered to watch the best players compete, first in small groups, then in packed arenas and even on television. Companies like Samsung sponsored professional StarCraft teams, while a player named Lim Yo-hwan, best known by his handle Boxer, became the Korean version of Michael Jordan. These players were the equivalent of K-pop stars, said Elaine D'Iorio, a director of business development at Blizzard. Girls were yelling and screaming. It was crazy. Back in 2004, this success had presented the developers on Blizzard's Team 1 with an odd dilemma. From a financial and creative perspective, a sequel to StarCraft made sense, but how could they possibly live up to a game that players considered perfect? It would be extremely difficult to surpass those expectations, and not ship something that was disappointing, said Tim Campbell, a designer. At first, they hoped to put together a quick sequel, but just as StarCraft 2 began development, Team 1's programmers and artists were pulled over to help out with World of Warcraft, grinding momentum to a halt. For the next 2 years, StarCraft 2 remained on Blizzard's back burner as the company scrambled to fix bugs and churn out content. By the end of 2006, Team 1 was back intact, working on a new graphical engine for their sequel that would improve on what Warcraft 3 had accomplished. Games were looking so different by then that we couldn't just make it look like the original, said Jay Hathaway, an animator. We have to do it in 3D, but it still has to feel like StarCraft. One of the team's first tasks was to remake the original StarCraft in the new StarCraft 2 engine so they could get a feel for the technical differences. They realized that they could now play around with depth and height, creating units that would never have been viable in the first game, like the Colossus, a hulking robotic walker that could plod up and down cliffs. There was a lot of tech that just wasn't possible in a 2D game, said artist Phil Gonzalez. The StarCraft 2 team had no shortage of ideas for new units, but experimenting too much risked alienating StarCraft obsessives. Under Blizzard Vice President Rob Pardo and director Dustin Browder, the team came up with a handful of mantras for the game. One tenet, adapted from legendary Civilization designer Sid Meier, was that 1/3 of the units should return from the old game, 1/3 should be modified versions, and 1/3 should be brand new. But some members of the team, whether they were Blizzard veterans or younger employees who had grown up playing StarCraft, struggled to make decisions that moved too far away from the first game. In meetings, Pardo liked to tell the team that what baseball was to the United States, StarCraft was to South Korea. What they were making then was Baseball 2.0. They needed to make an even better version of one of the most iconic games of all time. Good luck. In the spring of 2007, executives and developers flew to Seoul, South Korea for the Blizzard Worldwide Invitational, a smaller-scale international version of BlizzCon. They took over Olympic Park, where attendees could line up for developer signings and take rides on hot air balloons adorned with World of Warcraft art. Thousands of fans swarmed the arena to watch a short teaser trailer, which spotlighted a gruff Terran Marine putting on his gear and proclaiming that everybody in the crowd was thinking, now that it had been nearly a decade since the first StarCraft came out. And you know what that's gonna be, right? But I am gonna play at least that particular bit. Not all of it, of course, but just enough to get the feel of it. This particular.
You, that armor, will be your new self.
This one.
Make no mistake. War is coming. With all its glory. And all its horror. Mr. Findley, your freedom awaits.
Hell, it's about time.
Security was tight when Adam Hayes first showed up at Blizzard's campus a year later, in the summer of 2008. He had to check into the guarded steel gate, walk to the front office building, and then wait for his new boss to come down and escort him to his desk. When he looked around and saw that the lobby's walls were covered in snapshots from Blizzard's history, he choked up. Hayes had spent countless hours playing StarCraft in college, conquering the campaign, battling other players in high-stakes duels, and even creating his own maps using the game's robust editor, which made him realize that maybe he could be a professional video game designer. He'd spent 6 years at Electronic Arts working on real-time strategy games that aimed to be as influential as StarCraft, and now he was standing on campus at Blizzard Entertainment, about to become a level designer on the sequel. He looked over at the photos and realized that some were from the original release of StarCraft 10 years earlier. "I remember getting goosebumps," Hayes said. When he arrived at the Team 1 building, Hayes was blown away. At his last job, they had put up a few video game posters. Here, the walls were completely painted with scenes from StarCraft, hand-drawn by longtime Blizzard artist Sam Didier. "Walking through the halls for the first time was exhilarating," said Hayes. "You could tell they were very proud of what they'd created." Hayes learned that StarCraft 2's multiplayer was in solid shape, mixing old units like Terran siege tanks with new ones like the Protoss Stalker, a quadrupedal robot that could teleport short distances. There were very few single-player missions completed, but there was plenty of time for that. The philosophy was, "Let's nail the multiplayer, then we'll build the campaign," said Hayes. The only problem was that Chris Metzen had come up with way more story than could fit in a single game, and there were plans for upward of 30 missions per race, 3 times the scale of the first StarCraft. When I got there and saw what they had planned, I'm thinking, there's no way we're gonna do this for all of the factions in one game, said Hayes. Inspired by Valve's smash hit Half-Life 2, leadership proposed that they split StarCraft 2 into 3 games. The first, Wings of Liberty, would include the Terran campaign and a handful of other features like multiplayer and a map editor. Then they put out the Zerg campaign with Heart of the Swarm, and conclude the trilogy with the Protoss in Legacy of the Void. It seemed like a natural split, and each new release would be an opportunity to continue refining the multiplayer and other features. Players weren't pleased when they first heard that they'd have to wait years for the complete experience, but the developers knew that the only other options were either scaling back their ambitions or working impossible hours. Splitting it was the right decision, said designer Jason Huck. By the mid-2000s, video game storytelling had evolved in significant ways. Games like Mass Effect boasted detailed 3D models for their characters, who could now demonstrate hand gestures and crinkled eyes as they spoke. Blizzard wanted to take a similar approach for StarCraft 2, so the company's ever-growing cinematics department was tasked with building elaborate short films that would unfold during the game. Between Wings of Liberty missions, cutscenes would show a cigarette-smoking Raynor chatting with members of his crew, or Banshee getting jets firing missiles at swarms of menacing Zerg. This led to some painful growing moments as the StarCraft 2 team and the cinematics department learned how to work together, a tension that would become increasingly common with Blizzard. The filmmakers and cinematics wanted to make their shots look as visually striking as possible, even if that meant building units that didn't look exactly like their in-game counterparts. "Would have this pushback with the cinematic department over their designs," said Phil Gonzalez. "You got rid of the Archon's blades? What's going on?" Newcomers to the StarCraft 2 team had to navigate these politics, but they also quickly found out what made Blizzard stand out from other companies: a willingness to let games simmer, like chili sitting on the stove, as Browder described it. Blizzard's developers would iterate over and over, polishing some ideas and discarding others. Jason Huck, who had previously worked at companies that prioritized hitting deadlines, found it difficult to acclimate to an atmosphere where he didn't just have one chance to design a mission. "I had to develop the confidence to say, 'No, this sucks. I'm going to start over,'" Huck said. "It's easy to get really attached to something, to guard it until it's perfect. It's more important to get your ideas out quick, iterate. That's really how you refine stuff to the quality level we were aspiring for." In the summer of 2009, StarCraft 2 was nearing the finish line when another obstacle emerged: BattleNet 2.0, the next iteration of Blizzard's online service, which was planned to coincide with Wings of Liberty but needed more time. Engineers from across the company relocated to the BattleNet department to help finish the service, while StarCraft 2's artists and designers were suddenly granted months of extra time to polish the game. When Morhaime called Kotick to tell him that Blizzard planned to delay the next StarCraft a year, he was shocked when the new boss asked how he planned to make up for the missing revenue. Back in the Vivendi days, slipping a year might not have been a huge deal because Blizzard had been such a small part in the broader conglomerate. But now, the bump could have a significant impact on Activision's Blizzard stock price. It was like Blizzard had gone from a small fish in big pond to big fish in small pond. Except the pond was full of investor piranhas who expected revenue growth every quarter. Morhaime had to offer an explanation to shareholders and analysts. We recognize that we only get one chance to make a first impression," Morhaime said on a quarterly earnings call in August 2009. "While we could rush into beta and launch an inferior game and service experience this year, fixing that experience over time, our track record has proven that there is a far greater value for us and our players in making sure that the experience is great right from the start." Executives at Blizzard knew delaying the game was the right decision, no matter how Wall Street reacted. On February 2010, StarCraft 2 Wings of Liberty received the public beta, and that lasted several months, allowing players to mess around with multiplayer and build excitement for the full release. Everyone expected Blizzard's when it's ready philosophy to pay off in the terms of polish and consistency, and the beta is proof that this approach can pay real dividends, wrote an IGN critic. When StarCraft 2 came out that July, it sold 3 million copies in a month and was widely praised for feeling innovative, while at the same time retaining what made the first game great. In South Korea, Blizzard put on a marketing blitz, advertising the new game on television and even, in one ostentatious move, on the side of 2 747 jet planes. But something about the release felt off. StarCraft 2 didn't seem to be resonating with Koreans as much as its predecessor. In 2000, you'd have found people playing StarCraft in every PC bang in the country. A decade later, Koreans were flocking to other games. In the months following the release of StarCraft 2 Wings of Liberty, it became clear that it hadn't even come close to surpassing baseball. Many Koreans were still sticking to the first game. Perhaps Blizzard should have seen this coming. After all, it was locked in a Cold War against one of South Korea's most powerful organizations. 10 years earlier, with StarCraft on the rise, South Korea's government created an unofficial division called the Korea Esports Association, or KESPA, with the authority to regulate competitive leagues for video games. For the next few years, as StarCraft evolved into South Korea's national pastime, Caspa handled the game's professional scene as it saw fit. Blizzard, preoccupied with World of Warcraft, didn't pay much attention. Morhaime and crew were just thrilled to see how many people were buying and playing StarCraft. But in 2007, the landscape changed when Caspa signed a deal with Korean cable networks, reportedly worth around $1.3 million, to broadcast StarCraft game matches on television. The money was insignificant for a company as large as Blizzard, but the deal sparked other concerns. Video game broadcasting existed in a legal gray area that didn't yet have clear precedent either in Korea or the United States, and Blizzard's executives wanted to ensure that StarCraft didn't somehow fall into the public domain. They'd already seen the trademark for their online platform, Battle.net, get rejected in South Korea, where it was used as a generic term to refer to playing games online. The executives commissioned the consulting firm McKinsey to conduct some research, and the information and the recommendation helped solidify their perspective. They should charge a licensing fee for TV broadcasts. It was too late for StarCraft, but they would not allow South Korea to have free reign with StarCraft 2. For the next 3 years, Blizzard and Caspa held a series of on-and-off negotiations that grew increasingly contentious, peaking during one meeting where, according to several attendees, a representative of Caspa looked at Blizzard's Paul Sams and declared, "We're FIFA. You guys are the fucking soccer ball." Which, as my friend put it, is perhaps the coldest line you can say to a game developer. From Caspa's perspective, Blizzard's demands made no sense. Why would anyone try to copyright a sport? Did the inventor of basketball get royalties from the NBA? Caspa had built the StarCraft scene in South Korea, and nobody was really making all that much money from it in the first place. In 2010, shortly before StarCraft 2's release, negotiations reached a standstill. Morhaime wrote an open letter to Korean gamers declaring that they had cut off talks with Caspa because the organization did not recognize our intellectual property rights. Instead, Blizzard signed a deal with a different company called GoMTV for the broadcast rights to its games in South Korea. Caspa fired back that Blizzard's demands had been unreasonable and began blitzing the company in the Korean press, even forbidding its professional StarCraft players from competing in the sequel. South Korea gave StarCraft 2 a restrictive adults-only rating, which Blizzard executives suspected was also the work of Caspa. The two organizations entered a legal dispute, and Sam sniped in one press conference that it was unfortunate that the esports industry in Korea is lagging behind other industries in recognition of intellectual property rights. In 2012, 5 years after the battle began, Blizzard and Caspa finally made peace, negotiating a three-way deal with GoMTV to collaborate on tournaments and TV broadcasts. But the damage was already done. StarCraft 2 sold millions of copies but would never hit the same heights as its predecessor in South Korea, preventing it from truly meeting the company's expectations. Yet it was still a great game, and to the people who ran Blizzard, that was what mattered most. Everything else would take care of itself, Morhaime believed. And believe it or not, we are 1/3 through. We are 1/3 of the way through part 2 of the book. You can see how it all starts to unravel, and all the setups are beginning to take shape. And the fall, oh, the fall will come. But I am looking at the time, and I think it's time for us to wrap it up. Thank you all for coming. Hopefully you're enjoying the material. I will see you all tomorrow. We will continue with our RPG game of the week. Yeah, this is the beginning of it's the end of the beginning of the end. Good night, and see you next time. Peace out.